Welcome, everybody. Really glad to have you here. This is the second session of the first day of online learning labs at ANH Academy Week 2025. Really glad to have you all here. We have a great session in store. My name's Alex. I'm the technical manager for this learning lab entitled Introduction to Making Empowerment Count Using the Women's Empowerment Metric for National Statistical Systems in Your Research. It's chaired by a number of colleagues at IFPRI and FAO. We're glad to have them here, and they'll introduce themselves shortly. So without any further ado, thank you again for being here. We really appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to Agnes to introduce the rest of our hosts today.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm actually not just glad, I'm very excited to be in this online learning lab to introduce the Women's Empowerment Metric for National Statistical Systems, or WEMNS. And this was put together by the team whose names are listed here. My name is Agnes Kisumbing. I'm a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. We're joined by Emily Myers, a senior research analyst in the Poverty, Gender, and Inclusion Unit at IFPRI, where I also belong. Flor Paz, a senior research analyst at the Poverty, Gender, and Inclusion Unit, also at IFPRI. Hazel Malapit is making a presentation as we speak, so she will be joining us late. She's a senior research coordinator at PGI and IFPRI. Jessica Heckert is unable to join us today, but put a lot of thought into the development of this instrument. She's a senior research fellow at IFPRI. Nate Ferguson, who is part of our team, is a research analyst in the Natural Resources and Resilience Unit at IFPRI. And finally, very importantly, we have Stefania Di Giuseppe, a statistician at FAO, who brings perspective from the field and the actual pilot to this effort. Okay, so this learning lab is really about how you, our participants, can use the Women's Empowerment Metric for National Statistical Systems, pronounced WEMNS, in your research. We have been accused of using unpronounceable acronyms. I think everybody here should be able to pronounce WEMNS. Next slide. So what are we aiming to achieve in this session? First, we want to help you, our participants, to integrate WEMNS into your research and to understand the technical considerations for incorporating this new tool into data collection approaches. Secondly, we want to teach you how to interpret WEMNS results by using examples from the actual WEMNS pilot studies. This is not an instrument that only lives in the air. That's actually been field tested. This part of the learning lab will focus on diagnosing areas of disempowerment and identifying differences between women and men. And then we're going to go to we're going to talk about the process of developing WEMNS and its conceptual framework, its implementation, and then a deep dive into the questionnaire and indicators, how to calculate WEMNS, interpreting pilot WEMNS results, and then next steps for WEMNS. And make sure to submit your questions for the Q&A. Okay, so you may be wondering why we're developing yet another empowerment metric. Those of you who have been attending learning labs at ANH for a number of years, you will know that this team has been developing a lot of empowerment measures. And the reason we do that is that metrics are important. Metrics are important if they can motivate policy action, monitor progress, and shape policy. And the fact that women's empowerment and gender equality have been elevated to a sustainable goal, development goal, recognize the intrinsic value of both. I would say that previously people were interested in women's empowerment because it was helpful in attaining other development goals, but with the recognition of these goals as SDG 5, we recognize that they are important in themselves. Next slide, please. So many of you will have seen this definition of empowerment, which is derived from Naila Kabir's definition. It is a process of change resulting in an expansion in people's ability to make strategic life choices, especially in a context where this ability was previously denied to them. Previous metrics of women's empowerment that we developed focused on agency, which is the capacity to define one's own goals and make strategic choices to pursue these goals. And this is partly because existing metrics already take into account resources and achievements. But as you will see later on, we see that resources can enable agency, and this is more reflected in women's than in the other empowerment metrics that we develop. So next slide. So why develop women's? There has been tremendous growth in the use of women's empowerment metrics since 2010. The map on the right shows the global adoption of the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index and its variants between 2012, when it was first launched, to the present. It's now being used by 280 organizations in 69 countries as of June 2025. But many of you will have complained to us that it primarily focuses on agriculture and doesn't take a look at non-farm employment or other livelihoods. The questionnaire is very long, as many of you know, and it's not specifically aligned to SCG monitoring. So we try to address this in this new tool. Next slide, please. So what is WEMNS? It's a survey-based and direct measure of empowerment, meaning it does not use proxy indicators. It actually gets people's responses to questions designed to elicit how empowered they are and to build up these indicators based on survey responses. It's only 15 minutes long, so it's very short compared to other versions of, for example, the way that we've implemented. We were explicitly told to design something that was shorter than 15 minutes if we wanted it to be used in national and multi-topic household surveys. In fact, you will see later on that it is shorter. Third, it is aligned with SDG 5, Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality, and other relevant SGD targets. It can, in fact, be used to measure, for example, SDG targets on land. And lastly, for those who are interested in the nitty-gritty of index development, it's counting-based. It's decomposable into its component parts. You can compare across subpopulations, and it's an index that uses the same methodology as multidimensional poverty indices. So it's if you have ever been if you've ever used a multidimensional poverty index, the rationale behind this is quite similar. Okay, next slide, please. I am not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the processes of the process underlying the development of women's. We started with stakeholder consultations, reviewed SDG targets, developed a questionnaire, consulted stakeholders, and chose our pilot countries for Bangladesh, Malawi, and Nepal in the first phase. So this all happened during COVID. And so we ended up using phone surveys in these three countries between 2021 and 2022. Guatemala was added as a pilot survey, both to include Latin America and to see how this instrument would work in populations with high proportion of indigenous peoples. We did a one-wave phone survey in Guatemala in 2022. Psychometric analysis, again, revising the questionnaire. And then face-to-face surveys in 2022 and 2023, psychometric validation, index construction, and this was finally launched in February of 2024. So although it's a young survey, a young tool, it has been fielded in many places. And Stefania will tell us later on how it's being used in the 50 by 2030 initiative. Next slide, please. Okay, we are going to go over this in greater detail in throughout the learning lab. So I'm not going to read the very tiny indicators and the survey modules and the SDG targets one by one to you. But just to say that the survey modules cover quite a large range of topics, including paid and unpaid activities, participation and leadership in the community, life transitions and awareness of rights, financial services and credit, property ownership, decision-making, the use of information and communication technology, and sexual harassment. So it is quite broad in scope compared to the existing WEA-based indicators. Next slide, please. And what is the conceptual justification for women's? So very similar to the other WEA instruments, starting from ProWEA, it's grounded in path-breaking theories of empowerment, such as those of Naila Kabir, Joe Rowlands, and Paulo Freire. Intrinsic agency or power within is critical consciousness and awareness of inequalities. It's a power within you. Instrumental agency or the power too is what we're most familiar with, as it's a most common measure of agency, and it's often the one that's used by development organizations as monitoring indicators. Collective agency or power with focuses on empowerment beyond the household and what happens when individuals come together. And agency enabling resources are the material and human and social resources that enhance ability to exercise choice. So I will now pass this over to Stefania, I believe.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. Now we will move to some fieldwork consideration when implementing the WEMNS. Next one. Okay, so as already mentioned by Agnes, let's say that with the pilot country, the overall time estimated for women and men is around 15 minutes. Of course, for women is a little bit higher because you will see along the presentation that women have just a few questions more than men. How we take the time span is based each section of the van on the questionnaire as a time span and a start and an end time. And regarding the implementation of FAO in the three countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania, we have an average of 11 minutes. So, meaning that for women it's 16 minutes, and for men it's a little bit lower. Also because in these three countries we also add few more questions for women. There are cultural and sensitivity and norms issue, access to women respondents, and translation issue, which is also very important. So regarding the cultural sensitivity, that the respondent may feel uncomfortable discussing, for example, gender roles, power, or personal decision due to cultural taboo, or women may not be allowed to speak to male enumerators, or may be too busy with the household, with the housework. And then what is very important is the translation issue, that also gender concept like empowerment, agency, or joint decision making may be difficult to be translated into local language. That's why it's really important to put up to have a training for trainee, for enumerators, just to go through this local language issue. Next slide. Okay, so and when planning for fieldwork, it's critical that female enumerators are hired to make a gender balance. So, for example, in our implementation for Sierra Leone, we had 50-50, so we had male enumerators and female enumerators. For Liberia, we managed to have all female enumerators. And for Zanzibar, we managed to have for women female enumerator and for men male enumerator, so they will feel comfortable with all the critical questions. It is important also to have a very thorough training of enumerators and training of trainee, because through the training you can add the locally relevant example that can help to improve the clarity of each question. But also it's very important during the training to ensure that the enumerators will not express judgment regarding very critical question like awareness of rights, attitudes towards sexual harassment. which is very, and those are very delicate topics. Next one. Okay, so and one of the consideration when implementing, as I mentioned, you need to seek for clear communication of the objective of the survey when you approach the community in general, but specifically the respondent. As mentioned, there should be a gender match between enumerators and respondent as much as possible. There should be a careful planning and organization of the field work setup. For example, it will be good if supervisor approach all household early and gather all possible information regarding the number of adults and the gender background in order to better schedule the interview. It will be also very important to conduct interview in a private mode and simultaneously in case in the household there will be two women or one man or a women interview. That's to avoid as much as possible transfer of information between the respondent. And also it is very important that the respondent will feel secure in the environment, and it also will feel free to share his idea, to share in a free environment the answer of the questionnaire.
But if you have any other questions you haven't asked yet, you should also be able to ask them on Slido. What about the ethical consideration first of all? And how many countries has the women's indicator been used?
I can start answering the first one.
Okay, thanks, Agnes.
So we have all our surveys go through ethical clearances, both at our institutional level. So IFPRI has an institutional review board, and so you know, it does go through ethics review, and we also get ethics review in the countries that require them. One of the things that is very important, I think, in survey-based indicators is making sure that the respondent is not placed at risk. So we always have make sure in our instructions to enumerators that the respondent is interviewed in private, so as not to increase the risk of anything or any backlash from any other household member. And we don't, for example, also ask any questions directly about, for example, intimate partner violence or experience of sexual harassment. These are all about attitudes, because we are usually unable to provide services to directly deal with IPV or domestic violence issues or sexual harassment issues. Does anybody else from the team want to chime in?
No, I think you really covered it all. And, just going back to what Stefania was saying, like a few slides back, is, making sure that you match the gender of your enumerator with the respondent so that they feel comfortable, and also making sure that your respondents have privacy so that they can answer about their attitudes freely, is really key to having, really when you're boots on the ground in the field, making sure that your survey is proceeding, ethically.
I just want to give a little bit more background on what Agnes just said. Our principle behind our surveys is no harm to be done. We want to, when we engage the people in our surveys, we want to leave the participants, interviewees, better or at the same level of welfare as we found them. So the surveys are designed in such a way that we don't want to ask any questions that might jeopardize in any way the welfare or the interactions with other family members of the interviewees, which is why we don't ask questions that we cannot provide services if we have some kind of sensitive answers that we cannot help them with the responses we're getting.
Great, thank you, Flor. Let's go. Now we have lots of questions. So how many countries have you used? Is it 7?
Yeah, it's 7. Yes.
Okay.
So the four pilot countries and the the 3 countries under the 50 by 30 initiative, which is part of the Scale Up.
Yes.
I'll take the next question because we always get this question. For research, can we use modules only relevant to our research? How do we calculate empowerment if not using the full tool? No, you cannot only use the modules only relevant to your research because the tool was validated using psychometric validation, and with the exact, with the same questions, exact number of questions, the weights were worked out. And so if you only, use part of the tool rather than the full tool, you're not measuring empowerment, you're measuring something else. So it's like if you, for example, are baking a cake and you forget to put in the sugar, or you forget to put in the flour, you're going to get something else. If you forget to put in the sugar, you have an omelette or whatever. Okay, next question. So please do not, if you're using modules that are only relevant to your research, call it something else. It's not women's. It's a measure of maybe of agency or something. Of course, I mean, yeah, it's not. It's only 15 minutes long maximum. I think in the pilots, in the Scale Up, countries are even reporting shorter times. The tools are open access and can be used in any setting. You can certainly use it in Indonesia, but you will have to obviously translate to Bahasa and to maybe modify some of the questions that are not locally applicable. Does anybody else want to take the next question?
I can take it.
Okay.
So yes, the tool is specific for individual empowerment, and it has not been applied for group empowerment. So the piloting for now, the 7 country, is what we have been calculating is individual empowerment for men and women.
Okay.
So
All right.
there is a collective agency indicator, but it is designed to assess an individual's perception of collective agency. So we are currently developing measures of, other measures of collective agency, but this isn't it. That's all.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so we'll keep going. So Agnes had mentioned earlier that we would talk a little bit more in depth about the women's component domains and indicators. So, as a quick review, obviously we have 3 of the 4 domains focusing on agency: the intrinsic agency, instrumental agency, collective agency, as well as the 4th category about the agency enabling resources. I won't go through and read each specific indicator, but notice that we have 3 indicators in each of the 4 domains for the 12 total. And now I'll pass it to Stefania.
Yes, so yeah, we can go to the next one. So now we will go through the calculation of 2 indicators, part of the intrinsic agency. We will read the question and then I will show you how to measure the 3 indicators. Okay, next one. So we have the first question regards life transition and awareness of rights, and this is the typical structure of the question. There are several statements, and a woman will answer if she is agree, partially disagree, partially agree, or fully agree on this statement. And the statement concern the livelihood choice and family formation. So, for example, among the livelihood choice, we have every woman should be free to choose whether to complete secondary school. Every woman should be free to choose whether to work for pay or whether to prioritize her work for pay over domestic duty, what to do with any money that she earns, if she can choose to purchase land, a house, or other valuable goods. And then for those regarding the family formation, that a woman is free to choose when to get married, to divorce or end their marriage, whether and when to have children and when not to have children. And then we have all the answer. Okay, next one. Okay, so just to highlight what already said by Agnes, so what we are asking here is not if they experience something like that, but what their attitude are, what their perception. And this, asking this type of question better suited for measuring intrinsic agency, because open possibility that respondents' current attitudes can evolve over time. And also this type of question could be paired with a module asking about women experience in this same area when we ask about attitude. Okay, next one.
All right, so this is a video just kind of actually cosplaying or role playing this module, just so you can get a sense of how
Hi
fast
everyone,
it
my
is.
name is Flor Paz. I'm a research analyst with IFPRI.
And my name is Emily Myers, and I'm a senior research analyst at IFPRI. Today we'll be demonstrating how to implement Module F of the Women's Survey. I'll be playing the role of Grace, a married woman with 3 children from Malawi.
And I will be playing the role of the numerator. Well, thank you, Grace, for your kindness and help so far. We're going to start now Module F, Life Transition and Awareness of Rights. And I am going to go ahead and read you several statements of perceptions of women's rights. Please listen to each statement and indicate whether you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree with each of the statements. First, every woman should be free to choose whether to complete secondary school. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree with this statement?
Fully agree.
Every woman should be free to choose whether to work for pay.
And what were the answers again?
Sure. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree?
Partly agree.
Great. Every woman should be free to choose to prioritize for work for pay over domestic duties. And I'm going to remind you, Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree?
Well, for me, it's most important to make sure my household is taken care of first. I have 3 kids. So partly disagree.
Everyone should be free to choose then what to do with any of the money that she earns. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree?
Fully agree.
Every woman should be free to choose to purchase land, a house, or other valuable goods. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree with this statement?
Fully agree.
Every woman should be free to choose when to get married. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree with this statement?
Fully agree.
Every woman should be free to choose to divorce or end her marriage. And again, Grace, your options are fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree with the statement.
Fully agree.
Every woman should be free to choose where and when to have children. Grace, do you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree?
Fully agree.
And finally, every woman should be free to choose not to have any more children.
Fully agree.
Great, thank you so much, Grace.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thankfully, we're all done forcing me to watch a video of myself. But I'll pass it back to Stefania
Yeah.
to go through, okay, so you had your interview, what happens next?
Okay, so now we need to code all the answers. So as you see before, each answer has a code. So for example, fully disagree is 0, partially disagree is 1, partially agree is 2, and fully agree is 3. So you can see here, for example, that the 2 women are fully agree on statement A, they fully agree on statement D, E, F, H, and I, but you see that there is for example, the second female doesn't partially agree on statement B, disagree on statement C, and the first woman partially agree on statement 1. Okay, so how do we manage that? So in order to construct the indicator, we have this, it's called dual approach. So or the women fully agree, or not. So the women that fully agree will get 1, and the women and all the other type of answer will get 0, because we classify as fully agree and does not fully agree. So here the recording, the same statement, we will have fully agree 1 and does not fully agree 0. Is it clear? So we have the dual approach. Those fully agree will be coded as 1, and the rest does not fully agree as 0. Okay? So, and what does it mean that? So, once we finish coding all the statement, we will arrive at a final indicator. So all the women which fully agree in all the statement will be considered unconstrained. The woman which might be fully agree with some statement but does not fully agree in some other statement will be constrained. Okay?
Okay. All right, next slide.
Yeah, so it will be, yeah, because this
Okay.
is, okay, this is, for example, coming from one of the country where we implemented the WEMNS. So you can see 5 region and how women reacted to all the statement. So when you see, when it comes to family formation, not all the women fully agree on the statement, but when it comes to livelihood choice, you see that there is a higher level of people, of women fully agree on that. So to the end of the final indicator, we consider as unconstrained all those women answering fully agree to all the statement. And this will be the indicator that will ended up in the final calculation of the WEMNS. Okay? Now, the other module is about sexual harassment. Also here, there are 5 statements, and the woman needs to answer never acceptable, sometimes acceptable, usually acceptable. So to the end of the indicator calculation, of course, we will consider the first answer, never acceptable. So following the same step of the module presented before, all the women answering never acceptable to all these 5 statements will be considered unconstrained. Those that can, for some statement can answer never acceptable, and for others sometimes acceptable, will be considered constrained. Okay, here from the same country, you see that women are pretty aware of what is acceptable and is not acceptable, except region 5, but this region has a problem with the representativeness, so has a very small number of observations. But overall, you see that at country level, the level of acceptance is very, very high. Okay.
Okay. And so now, thank you so much, Stefania, for your examples. Next, we'll hand it over to my colleague Nathaniel to do another example, but in our instrumental agency domain.
Yeah, thanks, Emily, and thanks, Stefania. So instrumental agency, just a reminder, that means, that's kind of the power 2, whereas intrinsic agency is the power within. So instrumental agency, we have 3 indicators: influence over time allocation, influence in spending decisions, and influence in own health decisions. And I'm going to walk you through the calculation of influence over time allocation. And we can look at the next slide. So influence in time allocation in other versions of the WEA, we've had a sort of a time module, a time use module, where we collect data on what the respondent is doing, in different blocks of time. But with this, we're actually finding out, how much agency they had in how they spend their time. So what we do is we go through 6 different activities. They're household duties, such as cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, different activities, caring for household members, going to the market to purchase essential items, non-agricultural work activities, which could be, working for pay, running a business, something like that, commercial agricultural production, and then agricultural production for household consumption. So we have these 6 activities, and for each of them, we have 2 questions. Question 1, so for example, if we're starting with row A, with household duties, we say, during the last 7 days, did you spend any time on household duties? Even if it's just for 1 hour. So if it's yes, we move on to question 2. If it's no, you go down to the next row and ask about the next activity. So question 2 is kind of the important one. It's, during the last 7 days, did you have no influence, some influence, or a lot of influence in decisions about the amount of time you spent on, this activity? So for each of those, either the person didn't do the activity at all, or if they did, we find out how much influence they had on the amount of time they spent on the activity. We can move to the next slide. Right. So what that means is basically we're going to show this slide briefly, and then I'll go back to the previous slide, because obviously, nobody was able to memorize all of those activities, and if you did, you should work as an enumerator for us. But so we have 6 activities. I want you to write down your own response to each of the time allocation questions. And you can be yourself, or you can be you can be a fictional person that you make up for yourself. But basically, go through it, write down your answers to each of the questions, and then I'm going to use that to to ask a Slido question. But yeah, go through this. You can mentally or on a scrap piece of paper go through each of the activities and kind of say, did I do this activity? And if I did it, was I the one who said, oh, I want to, I need to wash dishes, like I'm prioritizing this, or was it because somebody else told you to? Or how much agency did you have in the decision about how much time to spend doing that activity? So I'll just give a couple minutes, maybe just 1 minute, just go through it quickly, and we'll move on. Okay, so for each of those questions, what I want you to do is count. So there's 6 activities. Count the activities where either you don't participate, right, or you have a lot of influence. So there's 2 options for each activity. Count the ones where either you did not participate at all, or if you did participate, you had a lot of influence on the amount of time that you spent on that activity. So it's here. It's like either question 1. Oh, and this is, sorry, there's a typo here. It should say DO1A equals 2, or DO2A equals or DO2A DO1A equals 1, and question 2 is a lot of influence. So count those really fast. So this is, so when it says score, don't think about score, just think about it as and 0 is also a valid answer, but I don't know if it's possible to.
I would have to edit the Slido.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, so just put in how, again, this is how many activities where either you didn't do it or you had a lot of influence. Okay, cool.
All right.
All right, let's take a look. Okay, cool. Most people saying 6. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so basically this is just a view into how the data processing takes place. So the collected data, right? This is what the enumerator is collecting from each respondent, goes through the activities, which are on that 3rd column. If we're looking at the the top left table. So this is 2 people, right? There's 2 unique IDs. And there's 6 lines for each of them because that's the amount of activities. So you go through A, B, C, D, E, F. Question 1 is, did you participate? Right? And you have two, the first 2 rows say yes, then 3 no's, and then a yes. So if you did participate, that's when it's going to go on to question 2, right? So if you look at this first person, she said yes for activities A and B, and in the first one, she had a lot of influence. The second one, she had some influence. Then 3 in a row, she didn't participate, and then that last one, activity F, she had a lot of influence again. So then what happens is that that gets modified a little bit, right? Because the definition of the indicator is for all activity, in order to be considered unconstrained, you have to have a lot of influence in the amount of time you spent on each activity that you participated in. So because of that, we introduce a binary thing. Either you had a lot of influence or you didn't have a lot of influence. So that's what we see in a lot of influence on step 1 modified data in that last column there. It's either yes or no. So for this woman, she has 2 yeses and a no. For the man who is under her, he has 4 yeses. Then step 2, aggregated data, is exactly what we're talking about, right? How many activities did you participate in? And then how many activities did you have a lot of influence in? So for the female, she participated in 3 activities, and but only 2 of them had a lot of influence. For the male, it's 4 out of 4, right? So what that means is the woman is constrained in the indicator because she didn't have a lot of influence in all of the activities that she participated in. But for the man, he is unconstrained in this indicator. So feel free to ask any questions if you have them. But let's otherwise, I think we can continue. Right. So based on your score, so remember that means this is the amount of activities that you had where you were either you didn't participate in the activity at all, or if you did, you had a lot of influence. Another way to think about it is, what's the inverse of that score or the complement of that score, right? How many activities did you participate in where you did not have a lot of influence? So based on that score, are you constrained in this indicator or unconstrained? And feel free to send your answers to the Slido. Cool, and that makes sense, right? Because the majority of people put 6 in question 1, right? Which 6 is the answer that basically corresponds to unconstrained, because we're counting, for each of those activities, did you, either you participated, or either you didn't participate or you participated and had a lot of influence. So these percentages look like what we'd expect. So yeah, looking good. And of course, there's also more complicated matters like if you put not applicable for question 2 for something. And another note is that if somebody participates in none of the activities, they would be they would get a missing for that indicator. But I assume that wasn't the case for any of us in this webinar. Anyways, yeah, we can move on. And what are your
Okay.
questions?
Yeah, so we did a lot talking about, calculations, just kind of where we get a little more complicated and in depth in our learning lab. So we're curious what we need to re-explain or any other questions you've thought of in the interim. So yeah, please go ahead and ask those now. Can you explain the final step of putting in constrained and unconstrained again?
Yeah, so I assume you mean how do we get to that final, how do we go from sort of the raw question data to constrained and unconstrained? Emily, do you want to go back to the slide that shows kind of the progression of the, yeah, right. So I'll try to answer what I think you're asking. So right, so if you look at the modified data, basically we have look at the last 2 columns. Participates with a question mark, and then a lot of influence with a question mark. There's 2 people. So let's just focus on the woman. She participates in 3 activities, as you can see in that column. And then, so for each of those, it's either a yes or a no, whether she has a lot of influence. So if you look at the aggregated data, there's 3 activities she participates in, but only 2 of them got a yes for a lot of influence. So because of that, she's constrained. If The difference between her and another theoretical woman respondent who was unconstrained in the indicator would be that no, right? On activity B in the modified data, if that no was a yes because she had a lot of influence instead of some influence, that would be the difference between her being unconstrained and constrained. I hope that makes sense. So it doesn't matter how many activities the person participates in. Even if you only participate in one activity out of the 6, but you say you have a lot of influence, you're just as, unconstrained as somebody who participated in all 6 activities and had a lot of influence on all 6 of those, the time they spent doing all 6 of those activities. I hope that's clarifying, but feel free to put in the chat if you still have further questions.
So with the final aggregation. So now we will see how do we measure the empowerment step by step. So as seen already, we have different indicators, and each indicator represents a specific dimension of empowerment, such as autonomy in decision making or control over resources. And the goal is to assess whether a respondent is constrained or unconstrained in this area. So for this, we have the dual classification approach. So for each indicator, a respondent can be classified as unconstrained. So for example, they have full autonomy or a high level of influence. Constrained, they can experience limitation, for example, in decision making or influence. Now we move to the next one. Okay, so once we calculate and we calculate all the indicator with the dual approach, constrained and unconstrained, we begin in organizing the indicator across the domain. So we have 4 dimensions: the awareness, which is the intrinsic agency, and this is specifically only for women, and capture the sense of internalized sense of freedom and entitlement of to rights, such as the freedom to make a livelihood choice, as we seen. Then we have dimension 2, which relates to instrumental agency, which reflects the women's and men actual influence in key household decision, such as how time or money are used. Then we have the collective agency, dimension 3, look at the men and women participation and confidence in community level space. And then we have the last one, which is agency enabling resources, which include critical enablers, like the use of communication technology, financial services, and property rights. So how we end up in the final women's empowerment indicator, and how we can compare women and men despite they have different dimensions. Okay, we can move to the other. This is just to let you know that the dimension number 4 has more indicator than the other agency. So we have the use of the communication technology. We have 2 indicators within the financial services, which is the use of financial services and the access to credit. For the property rights, we have 3 specific indicators. One related to documented property rights related to land and dwellings. The second one is secure transfer right related to land and dwellings. And the last one is secure tenure rights, also related to land and dwellings. Okay, so in order to make women and men comparable, given that they have different agency, so man has one less agency with respect to women, each indicator has a specific weight within each dimension. So the sum of all the weight of all the indicator is 1, and each dimension for women has a weight of 0.25, so that the sum of all the dimension is 1. So, for example, dimension 1, we have 3 indicators, which where we see before when I present to you model F and L. We have freedom in livelihood choice with a weight of 0.083, freedom in family formation 0.083, and sexual harassment, which is 0.083. If you sum these 3 weights, the total sum will be 0.25. The same we have in dimension 2 with 3 indicators. Also in the collective agency, you see 3 indicators with the same weight. The last one, since we have 6 indicators, so the first one, ICT, has the same weight as the other indicator. Regarding financial access, we have 2 sub-indicators with a weight of 0.04 each, and the total is 0.083 like the one before. And for the property rights, we have 3 indicators with a sub-weight of 0.027, which, if we sum, will give us 0.083. So that said, each indicator has an equal weight of, each dimension has an equal weight of 0.25 with a total weight of 1. Now we move to the man. Of course, man having one less dimension, we need to have a specific weight. So, for example, for dimension 2, in order to have a total weight of 1, each dimension needs to have a weight of 0.33. So we need to rescale the weight of each indicator to 0.11 for dimension 2 and 3. And for dimension 4 that has 6 sub-indicators, we need to reweight in a way that the final dimension weight is 0.33. So the total weight is equal to 1. I know it's a bit complicated, but...
So one thing I will add, thank you so much, Stefania, for your detailed explanation, is you'll notice, like, ultimately that all of the domains, are weighted equally. And part of the reason for that is because when we were developing WEMNS, we didn't want to prioritize, one type of, or one component of empowerment more than the others. So we made everything equally weighted. But that said, when you're running your own studies, we encourage everyone to think about, what indicators are most salient in your particular context, or which indicators would you expect to see moved by an agriculture intervention or program you're evaluating. So remember that, the domains are equally weighted, as Stefania has so clearly shown us here, but as individual researchers, reflect on what you need to target given your specific context.
No, do we need to say that for the final indicator, we just sum the weight? So it's a weighted summation of all the indicator, and we end up in an indicator going from 0 to 1, 0 meaning that less empowerment, to 1 meaning more empowered. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we'll hand it over to Nate.
I think this is still Stefania.
Okay, Stefania? Okay, my bad.
Yeah.
My notes are wrong then.
Okay. Okay, let's go back for a second. So in total, we use 12 indicators for women, with each indicator contributing to 1/12 to the total empowerment score. And for men, we have 9 indicators following the same structure. So each indicator for men contribute to 1/9 to the total empowerment. Okay? So we consider empowered women or men being unconstrained for 2/3 of the indicator in the final score. Okay? So, and how we measure and how we arrive to the indicator, we use a dual cutoff counting methodology, which was developed by Alkire and Foster. And this usually is used to measure the multidimensional poverty index. And it's very useful in settings like this when you have a multidimensional indicator and when the empowerment is not defined by a single indicator but by multiple dimension or agency. Okay, so I think I said that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So now, I guess Nate and I think can tag team this. I think my notes about who's responsible for what slides got messed up. But so now we've talked about, how to go from, answering the individual questions all the way through the dual counting, getting to the constrained and unconstrained. So now we just have a few questions just kind of as a knowledge check. And figuring out whether or not different individuals are constrained or unconstrained. So if you pull up your Slido, you should be able to see that Mary, just Mary's an example fake person, but Mary is unconstrained in 11 out of 12 indicators. So is Mary empowered? And make sure you hit send on your Slido as well. So, okay, great. At least the 5 people who answered on Slido got the question correct. Yes, Mary is empowered because obviously 11 out of 12 is more than 2/3. All right, so how did you know Mary was empowered? I kind of just gave you the answer. So this will be a test to see who was listening. Okay, yes, she achieved more than 70%, more than 2/3. All right, I see a few more people typing. Yeah, she met the threshold. All right, all good answers. Only one box was in the white color. That also works if you're a visual thinker. And because she was unconstrained in nearly all the indicators, also true. Yeah, more than 2/3. Okay. So very similar question. James, again, this is just a fake person, an example. James is unconstrained in 9 out of 9 indicators. Is James empowered? And yes, all 6 of us got it correct. And then a bit of a repeat of a question. How did you know James is empowered? And remember, James is a man. I didn't say that explicitly, but James is a man. All 9 unconstrained, more than 2/3. And let's see what else people have to say. All indicators are unconstrained. Yep. He's unconstrained in all indicators. And I see one more person still typing. And he had 100%. Yes. All right. So moving along, we now have Patricia, again, just a made up example person. Patricia is unconstrained in 7 of 12. Is Patricia empowered? Everybody said Patricia is not empowered. And how did we know that Patricia is not empowered? Quickly. I feel like we're getting the hang of it. She had less than 2/3. Less than 70. Yep. Right. Unconstrained. Yep, in less than 2/3. That's a good way to think about it in the inverse. Yes. All right, and so then our last example is Michael. Michael is unconstrained in 5 of 9 indicators. Is Michael empowered? And again, Michael is a man, so that's why he's out of the 9 indicators. Or, well, no, Michael is not empowered. Yes, everybody got the question correct. And so how do we know that Michael is not empowered? Similar to Patricia. Yep, less than 2/3. Just kind of like what we've been saying over and over. Yep. And yeah, he's unconstrained in less than 2/3. Yep. Okay. Now we are moving over to Nate. How does women's measure empowerment? Thank you everybody for your participation.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Emily. Yeah, this next part is pretty, you know, in the weeds, let's say, in terms of calculations. So don't be too concerned if you don't, you know, come away with this knowing exactly how to calculate everything. Just try to keep track of basically what is involved in the final women's score. So what women's is it's 1 minus, you know, in parentheses, the incidence of disempowerment, which is the percentage of respondents who are disempowered, multiplied by the intensity of the disempowerment, which is the share of the indicators in which the respondents are constrained. So what that means is in the final women's score, it includes two things. It's sort of the breadth of disempowerment, which is, you know, just this ratio of empowered to disempowered, how many people in the sample are disempowered. And then among those are disempowered, what is the depth of their disempowerment? So what is the average disempowerment score? Or what is the average share of indicators in which they are constrained, you know, among those disempowered respondents? So it's the breadth and the depth, not just like so, you know, if you're looking at the women's score, it's not merely, you know, if it's, you know, 0.6, it's not merely, oh, that means 60% of the respondents are empowered. No, it's a bit more complex than that. So one way of thinking of it is, you know, it reflects the extent of empowerment experienced by disempowered people as a percentage of the highest potential level of empowerment. So, you know, if all people were unconstrained in all indicators. So the scores range between 0 and 1, and higher values indicate greater empowerment. And let's go into that a little bit further on this next slide. Right, so here is a sample, right? This is, you know, we have 5 women and 5 men, and among the women, 2 of them are empowered out of the 5, and among the men, 4 of them are empowered. So yeah, so if we're looking at the incidence of disempowerment, 3 out of 5 of the women are disempowered, so that's 60%, and only 1 out of the 5 men is disempowered, so 20%. So that's the H, right? If women's equals 1 minus, you know, H times A, that's the H. The A is the average share of weighted indicators in which disempowered respondents are constrained. So if we look at just the disempowered women, right, we see the you know, the share of indicators in which they are unconstrained, but we want to know how many they're constrained in. So that's just the complement. It's 1 minus. So for this first disempowered woman who's unconstrained in 4 out of 12 indicators, that means she's constrained in the other 8, so 67%. So the average for them is 67%, and the average for the men is 44%. That's, remember, that's the percent of indicators in which disempowered men are constrained. So for the men, it's easy because there's only one of them. So the average is just the value. So for this disempowered man, he is constrained in 4 out of 9, or 44% of the indicators. So that's A. And we're keeping them separate between women and men. We're going to give a separate score, at least in this case, for the women's score of the women and the women's score of the men. So the disempowerment index is that H times A. That's where you combine these two quantities, the breadth or the incidence of disempowerment and the depth of disempowerment. So for women, that's 0.4, and for men, that's 0.09. So let's put that together into the women's index. Right. So the women's score is the extent of empowerment experienced by disempowered people as a percentage of the highest potential level of empowerment within the population, which is if all people were unconstrained in all indicators. So it's 1 minus that disempowerment index, which is what we calculated in the previous slide, which is H times A. So for women, it's 1 minus the disempowerment index, which ends up being 0.6. For men, it's 1 minus their disempowerment index, which ends up being 0.91. And in the, in this equation, it's 1 minus 0.67 times 0.60. Remember that 0.67 was the percentage of indicators in which disempowered women were constrained. So as you can see for men, that 0.20 reflects the fact that only 1 out of 5 of them were disempowered at all, and that results in a very, very high women's score, which corresponds to greater empowerment. So in this, the men are much more empowered than the women, and we can move on. So if I guess there's no questions section, but feel free to put questions in the chat because it is a bit complicated. But again, like the main takeaway is that the women's score reflects not only the incidence of empowerment, just like the percentage of people who are empowered, but also the depth of that empowerment. So it draws a distinction between a population where, say, 80% of people are empowered, but the 20% are, they're unconstrained in every single indicator, versus a population where 80% of people are empowered, but the disempowered people are almost empowered, right? This is a big difference. So we can move on.
Okay. All right. So in the next segment, Agnes will be going over some of the pilot results. She'll first start with Malawi, and then later we'll actually do breakout groups where we get to work and actually talk to each other a bit more to talk about the results from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Guatemala. But please pay attention to what Agnes is saying, because as Agnes is presenting the results, you'll be able to better interpret the results you'll discuss in your breakout groups. So thanks. I'll hand it over to Agnes.
Great, thanks, Emily. And I will actually be picking up immediately from Nate. So this is a pilot survey which was conducted in collaboration with the Malawi National Statistics Office. And what we found, so take note of those two numbers you get from each of the subpopulations, that 81% of women are disempowered, and these disempowered women are constrained on average in 53% of the weighted indicators. So the women's score ends up being 0.57. 62% of men are disempowered, so a much smaller proportion than women. And disempowered men are constrained on average in 48% of the weighted indicators, and their score is 0.70. So not surprisingly, women are substantially less empowered than men in the pilot sample. From just looking at this list of indicators, what do you think the top 3 contributors for disempowerment in Malawi are? Not from looking at the data, just what do you think from your experience or your gut feel?
Okay, so okay, all right. Influence in spending decisions and secure property rights seem tied for what we anticipate being most the top contributor to disempowerment. Otherwise, we think about influence over time allocation, participation in organizations, and leadership in organizations. So let's see what the data actually say.
So, okay. So one thing that's really nice about the women's is that you can use the counting-based methodology, allows you to decompose the contribution of each indicator to disempowerment. So we call these the disempowerment bars. No, they are not chocolate bars. They are not fun like chocolate bars. But in the figure shown here, the length of the bars shows the overall level of disempowerment of women and men. So as you can see here, women have a longer disempowerment bar, so they are more disempowered than men. The colored sections, so the little stripes within each bar, show the relative contribution of each indicator. And this is the way to see which one contributes the most to disempowerment. So experience with the WEA has shown us that this type of information can be particularly helpful as a diagnostic to inform program design if you're trying to target the area which has the biggest disempowerment. So take a look at the bars, note the biggest ones, because we are going to go to another question now based on you're looking at the actual data.
All All right, so I'll give everybody a minute more to take a look. Okay. All right, I'll go to the next Slido question. And this one asks, what are the top 3 contributors to disempowerment for women in Malawi? All right, so most of us got at least some of them correct. So yeah, influence over time allocation, that was one of the top contributors to disempowerment. Influence on spending decisions. And then the third one is leadership in organizations. But I think that was a bit smaller of a bar or more neck and neck with other ones. But so overall, it seems like we understand how to interpret the chart.
So, okay. So if you take all the sort of just extract the top 3 contributors from the left, the graph you saw earlier, and just extract and look at this, you will see that the primary drivers of disempowerment are the same for women and men in the pilot sample. So if you had done the same analysis for men, it would have come up this way. And this illustrates another potential application of WEMNS. So because we use a counting-based methodology, you can decompose the index to show each indicator's contribution to disempowerment, which is the left side. And in the figure shown here, the length of the bars show the overall level of disempowerment. Women are more disempowered, but the colored sections show the relative contribution. And you see here that they look almost, just eyeballing it, they look almost the same, but except that the influence in spending decisions, I think, is a much larger contributor to women's disempowerment than it is to men's. So I think it's over back to you, Emily.
Okay. So yes, thank you, Agnes. Thank you for walking us through that example. So next we'll be switching it up and actually talking to our peers, our colleagues, and we'll be working through these 3 discussion questions. So thanks everybody for your participation in our breakout groups. I think we're running up on the end of our time together today, so we'll keep it moving. So this slide is just giving the answer key to really that third question about what the top contributors to disempowerment are. We won't do a report back from each group just for the sake of time, but just take a quick look and see if you are on the right track or not. I can vouch for Nepal and say we were for sure for women and men. But to close us out today, I'll hand it back to Stefania, who'll talk a bit more about scaling up WEMNS.
Yes, so the WEMNS is currently being implemented in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania as part of the 50 by 2030 initiative, jointly led by FAO, IFAD, and World Bank, aiming at improve the quality and frequency of agricultural data to support evidence-based policymaking, including the SDG monitoring and the comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program indicators. But let's say that the vision is going beyond these pilots. So the long-term goal is to more broadly integrating the WEMNS into national household survey, allowing governments to track empowerment systematically across time and space. So, for example, the World Bank is considering the implementation of WEMNS within the LSMS and also implementing it in longitudinal mix model multi-topic national survey. So this is very important because it concerns the survey design consideration. So as we look forward towards scaling the WEMNS, there are several important considerations around the type of survey that can be embedded. I think you can move to the other one. So there are different type of survey. We have agricultural versus multi-topic survey, because actually now with FAO, the Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania, we are implementing the WEMNS, embed them into the agricultural national survey. But WEMNS can be also embedded in multi-topic survey, because there is a gain in the ability to link empowerment data with consumption, nutrition, and other welfare indicator, and this yielding into a more realistic view. We can WEMNS can also be implemented in cross-sectional or longitudinal data, as I mentioned. Because, for example, scaling WEMNS into longitudinal survey system can help us better understanding how empowerment evolves over time, especially in the face of shocks like conflict, health crisis, or climate impact. And also the modality in which the WEMNS can be implemented. That could be a face-to-face or phone survey, or a mix of the two. It can be integrating phone follow-ups to enable more frequent monitoring, and especially when there are limited resources like now. And why is important to scaling up the gender? Because of the power that empowerment data can have. Because collecting gender and empowerment data can allow us to identify systematic disparities, not just in the outcomes, but also in determinants and process behind these inequalities. And all these evidence are crucial for ensuring that policy are inclusive and appropriate for both women and men. So in short, gender data cannot be an option, but are essential for achieving the SDG, especially the goals related to poverty, food security, health, and equality.
But so on that note, just kind of wrapping it up to say thank you so much. As I had briefly mentioned a few minutes ago, we'd have all of our women's tools available on the WEA Resource Center. So if you go to wea.ifpri.info/women's, you'll be able to see everything we have.
Just want to thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank the IFPRI and FAO team for giving such a great presentation and learning lab today. There are learning labs tomorrow and the next day online for free that you can see on our website. And I hope to see a few of you in person for the Academy Week in Dar es Salaam next week as well. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.